So we're going to dive in. I'm going to actually turn it to Mike to direct these questions. I would just give the caveats that we shared in part one. One, a lot of us have young kids, and we're doing this late at night after they are supposedly in bed, but that could change at any second. So we're just kind of giving freedom to one another to be able to address anything that needs to be addressed at that point. Other caveats, we don't presume we speak for everyone who looks like us by any means. And so we just sharing from the overflow of our own personal experience. But know that there's, even within different ethnicities, a variety of different perspectives. So, and none of us claims to be the expert on any of these things that we're talking about, but we are wanting to glorify God as his family. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we've in the last conversation that we had, we talked a lot about our personal experiences just within our particular racial groups or ethnic national backgrounds. And we talked about a lot of the benefits, the beauty, the joys of being in multiracial community and having a diverse, friendships and relationships in the church. But we also briefly touched on what some of the challenges are. And so I want to set up kind of this question with an analogy that I've found helpful. I mean, certainly in my own personal experience, I was just trying to think through, how do I explain what it's been like, and often is like as a person of color, especially in a predominantly white context. And so this was the analogy I came up with, and as I've just found it captures what a lot of people feel. And I was curious to see, especially for those from racial minority groups listening, if you could articulate whether you resonate with this or you've seen it. But the analogy is that oftentimes people of color in churches like ours, or even outside of just church world, let's just say in their company, their workplace or at school, but particularly in the church, feel like welcomed guests. And what that means is you step into an environment, and for the most part, people are nice, leaders are nice. It's a good experience. Sometimes it's not a good experience, but even when it is a good experience, sometimes the feeling can be, I'm in the house, but this is not my home. And so it's kind of like a bed and breakfast, where you can use all the amenities. You eat dinner, or breakfast, I guess, a bed and breakfast. Let's stick with the analogy. You eat breakfast at the table. You even get a bed, you get a room to stay in. But you can't really move the furniture around. You can't change the paint color. The menu is already kind of predetermined. A lot of people I've talked to say that they feel that to some degree. And so I guess my question to you guys who are on here is, how have you seen that or personally experienced that? Or if your experience has been different, from that, I wanted to invite you to kind of share. So how have you personally experienced it, or how have you observed it? And so even for some of the white brothers and sisters who are on, you're in relationship with people, from different backgrounds too. So if you've observed it or heard people share, how would you articulate what they've shared?
I maybe I just want to share a little bit. So it's very common. Now we have, like in a church, we have met for several years as a Latino group. And still people refer to the church and the group. So it's not like a one group. So it takes a long time in trying to explain that we are one church, one church, one church, one church. And, it's like, I think sometimes people become more sensitive not to feel included. If there are different programs or different things, and then you don't have the answer to those programs because they are going in one direction and it's easier, right? In a big church, this is for years. McLean has changed over the years tremendously, right? I mean, from the time that I started attending to now, it's like very different, very different, completely different for the last 10 years. But that's how, you know, is, like with your analogy of the home, it's always, I don't know how to say, it's almost like always asking for permission to do something that actually in your home, you are not asking, let me put it this way. Just even the cups, just to give you an example, we use for the Lord's Supper, right? And people were saying, are we allowed to use the same cups? I said, yes, we are the same church. But that's what it's in the mind of some people. For me, it's not a problem, but this is how people perceive it. So when they ask those questions, that's where you sensitive, and as a pastor, you have to explain to them that it's one church and we are part of the same body. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I have to say something. I have learned, I had to find out why people say that. And it was sad for me to find out the reason why they ask is because they said that even though they're members, for them, they feel like second-class citizens. I hear the welcome guests, but for the Latino community, they feel as second-class citizens.
I don't know that. It's just like, I mean, it's a constant battle, right? And that's just want to add. I mean, that's where I don't know, even asking for some advice, but that's basically what long time ago we thought that it should be a fellowship part of, instead of being a church or a separate entity. I mean, it was very intentionally decided to be part of the church, and especially for that, very consciously thinking about we have to work somehow to make a unity, not a separation. So it has been challenging, but it has been a blessing. And anyway, so I mean, I can talk about for a long time about this topic, but that's.
I'd like to add to that. I think that there have been times where, as a minority, I've had to give up some of my preferences. And coming to a different church, I was raised in a traditional Black church, and so along with that, there was a type of music that I was used to, a type of dress, a type of worship style. And so in coming to a different church, I have grown to love different styles, but there is still a preference that that I hold. There's still like a little gospel that I love to hear. And so I think that in many ways I can believe the idea that like, hey, Janique, you're welcome here, but you may have to like leave what you prefer aside. And so I feel that in different ways as I give up some of my preferences.
And I think I've realized as a minority, I think the reason why that can easily happen sometimes is because I think you're and I'm kind of used to that, right? Like, it's not just the church in which I'm a minority in the world. And what that means is throughout my whole life, I've gained the experience and the ability to navigate different settings, right? It's nothing for me to maybe release some of my preferences in that way, because I've had to do that my entire life. And before in my life, I thought that I was actually doing the church a favor by always saying, hey, I'm going to release my preferences. We can just do what everyone else wants. But now in this day and age, I'm realizing that I'm robbing many of my majority culture brother and sisters' ability to actually lay down their preferences for the sake of other people as well. So I mean, that's what I would say to that.
Eric, if I could jump in, something I've learned from specifically the Filipino congregation that we had out there, Prince William, they immediately invited Nancy and I to just do fellowship with them, and they invited everyone in the church. But it was so much more fruitful because we got to see how they celebrate our Savior. They definitely immersed us in their foods, and we had so much fun celebrating with them. And so, if anything, I learned how to show someone how to become a welcome guest and to move into the home. Like, they took me from the front porch and moved me into their family room. And I learned a lot from those brothers and sisters. And today I still look up to them on how they show the love of Christ. And so that's just one example of many that I've seen in our church from the minority groups that really have taught me as a white person how to welcome people and move them from the welcome mat to the house and say, be at home.
Yeah, and you probably ate some good food too, didn't you, Todd? Yeah, I just want to jump in and just tell a quick story about I used to think differently years ago about this because there's so many churches, you know, and every church does things kind of their own way. And but I've come to realize, for the sake of the edification of a diverse body, it's something that has to be pursued, especially in music. And just a real quick story, just working with Thomas Keys has just been utter delight at Tyson's campus. And he's, I've just learned so much from him. And just this past February, he decided to put together a Negro spiritual medley for the congregation. And he started playing this one song, and I never heard the song. It sounded different. It felt different. And I'm standing at the 9 o'clock service in the back on the lower level. And right in front of me was an older African-American couple. And they're sitting there just listening, because that's what Thomas asked everybody to do, is sit there and just reflect. And as soon as he started singing that song, they turned and they looked to each other like they were so excited, and they put their foreheads together, and the woman started crying, as though it was like this moment of like we and this moment of connection. And it was just a beautiful moment for me, just affirming that like it's something that we have to pursue for the sake of the edification of our bodies. So anyway, just want to throw that out there. It's a really encouraging moment.
Yeah, and the stories that I've been hearing is, even my own experience, there's a lot of code switching that we're kind of forced to do as minorities. So living at home in our Asian kind of culture, and then right when we're living home and then interacting with people from different cultures, you know, you have to put on another, get into another code. So there's constant code switching going on. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of fatigue that's involved, and kind of pushing Mike's analogy, like there's no place like home. Hotel's nice, but you wanna, at the end of the day, you wanna come home and just relax. So we've had a lot of that kind of conversation with other Asian Americans, and even in our own experience as well.
And I've heard from multiple members from our church that they want to be in a small group with predominantly only Asian American members. And the reasoning for this was because they're saying they like the food, it's less work, it's less fatigue. Like he said, you don't have to code switch and in trying to get into another culture. So I've heard lots of stories within our church family wanting to be, wanting to stay in a Asian American bubble. And that's still evident in our church family.
So I'm like hesitant to even share this because I feel like it's brings back some painful memories, but I kind of feel like this is why we're here. So I think some of the most poignant times for me have been little subtle things that were said from church leadership in a service, referring to revival in America and how we kind of need to get back to the good old days. And I just remember many times sitting in the auditorium or even sitting backstage, you know, getting ready to go lead a closing worship song, and feeling like you can only say something like that if the assumption is that everyone else in the room feels the same way about the past that I do. And when I look back on American history, I don't want to go back there. The times where we talk about revival in America have been some of the worst times for African Americans in this country and for a lot of minority groups. And so it's just one of those things that, you know, minorities, they'll talk about at home, they'll text about it even during a worship service. And that is one of those moments where you feel like you're here, but you can't be fully vocal. And there's definitely there's an assumption from whoever is, you know, leading that, I don't know, that that you're not even in the room, I guess.
Or maybe not even an assumption that you're not in the room, but just, it's just nothing, it's something that some people just have never had to think about, you know? So, you know, I hear, for example, when we think about, abortion in our country, or especially when gay marriage, you know, was a heavy, like, legislative, you know, issue. And there was a lot of people kind of saying, like, America is becoming more and more depraved, you know, or we need the Holy Spirit to move so that we can go back to, you know, the days when this country was, you know, led by Judeo-Christian values. And I understand what people mean, but I think sometimes people aren't thinking about that parallel history, you know, that if you're saying you want to go back to the early foundations of our country, immediately for some of us, we're like, oh wait, so you mean Jamestown? You know what I mean? Like, you mean you mean like when like like, my name is Kelsey. I don't think that was from Africa. You know what I mean? That, I think that was probably from, you know, some dude that was Irish. And so I hear you. That can be even some of our theological assumptions sometimes don't take into account, you know, that history. David, I was going to ask you as a leader, and anybody to jump in. Well, I guess especially you, DJ, and Jess too, as worship leaders, as we talk about this in churches like McLean that have been, I mean, McLean has been increasingly diverse. You know, even before I came, you know, it was growing in diversity, which is a beautiful thing, but it's still been pretty much kind of dominated by just white kind of evangelical norms, you know, and that's been changing over the years. But one of the things in my conversations with some of our white brothers and sisters, it can be a little difficult in the same way that it's tough for us to give up our preferences coming in. Sometimes it can be difficult for our white brothers and sisters when, you know, there's a prayer, you know, in Spanish. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know Spanish. Or Thomas goes into, you know, this gospel song that sounds kind of foreign, and it's not Michael W. Smith, you know, or Hillsong. And it's just, so from a leadership perspective, David, as you've shepherded people, DJ Jess, as you've, you know, been leading worship and have to be in the mix of some of those decisions stylistically and all of that. Todd, as you've led folks at Tyson's and at Prince William, what are some of those challenges that you've heard from some of our white brothers and sisters, and how have you seen, you know, them kind of navigate, you know, that challenge of kind of their home kind of changing, you know, right before their eyes?
I think that is a great question. It's part of where my thoughts were going. Even as DJ, you were sharing that story, like, I remember that Sunday specifically. And I remember hearing comments like, we didn't like that music. And so there's this like beautiful moment happening over here. And then there's this yeah, this moment over here. And I think that's why I think we talked about this last time we were together. I just feel like so much of this really is at the core, like discipleship issues. Like it's what I appreciate. I think when we were praying, it was, or maybe it was in the video you shared, Gustavo, just applying Philippians 2 to this whole conversation. Each of you should look not only to his own interest, but to the interests of others. Like that kind of approach to life and church family like that is essential, because then, and I'm learning, like, then you don't say things like Ashley you reference, because when you're thinking about others, it's just gonna, and or you don't yeah, your immediate thought is, I didn't like that song. It's, well, I mean, I'm glad to lay aside my preferences for others in this way. Like and that's where I really believe and I think we see this in Romans 14 and 15, although it's different. But I mean, Romans 15 in particular is calling for just a unity in the body, but it is lay aside your preferences for your brother. And I think, yeah, I believe that for those who have, the house has looked more like home for us, then we have a responsibility to lay down preferences all the more. But I do think people will start to think, well, does that mean this is not my house anymore? I'm not going to feel at home either. Well, that's part of the beauty of what we're after. I think this is our home. It's not my home. And it's not your home either. It's like individually, it's our home together, which means it's going to look different. Like, it's not going to be all the same pictures on the wall, to keep going with the analogy. It's not going to be all the same food. Like, and I don't even know. And at some point it breaks down, like, what do we eat? Like, you gotta eat something. And, but that's where we want to work together to really make sure this is our house, not my house, like our house. But that involves sacrifice on all of our parts. And I think it's incumbent upon us who sacrifice in many ways the least to take all the more initiative in that. I think this is what Christ calls us to do.
Mike, you had asked what some of our white brothers and sisters grieve in those moments when things aren't comfortable for them. And I think the reason that music is such a debated topic is because it's a very powerful tool. Music can hold memories for us. That's why there's often a struggle between the classic hymns and modern worship, because the hymns of the past carry memories of conversion, or obviously they're also very theologically rich, but there's that debate. There are many debates over music. I know what I have come to observe as a worship leader for, I guess, over a decade now. What is unfamiliar to people can be distracting. And when you aren't used to a style, or you don't know the words, or the timing is difficult and complex, you're distracted, and therefore you're not engaging in worship in a way you were familiar or comfortable with in the previous service when you knew all those songs. And I'm not saying that's right. I think what you said, Eric, especially recently, as we've been able to work with Thomas and Gavin and Elijah and people who are bringing all sorts of different flavors of worship together. I know I personally have been challenged as a musician, as a vocalist, and I've grown being, not only being exposed to the worship, but having to do it, having to sing songs that are not within my comfort zone. They're not songs that I can walk out confidently and just do. Like, I'm having to practice, I'm having to learn, I'm having to grow, I'm having to open myself up to brand new things. And I would say the benefit has been huge growth. But I think one of the complaints, if you'd call it a complaint, would be I'm too distracted or too insecure to throw myself into worship. And And I think it's just a lack of familiarity. And that's the beauty of it. The more we do it, the more people are exposed to different types of music, it becomes more familiar to them and can become a comfort to them as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, well, first off, there's a great book called You Are What You Love. And it basically talks about how the liturgies of your life over time shape you to actually start to fall in love with those things. And that's why if you sang hymns your whole life, that's what you love, man. If you sang gospel your whole life, that's what you love. And so I think David's right. The discipleship, it takes time, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of patience to start introducing other things. But you can only do that if you also empower diverse leaders to lead in the ways that they know how. Part of the reason that it's a challenge for white people, I'll be honest, is because gospel music is much more advanced musically.
Really challenging.
And literally a 6-year-old can play a Hillsong song. It's like super, super easy, you know? So it's just easier to sing mighty to, what's that?
I said those 4 chords.
I'm telling you, man.
4 chords and the truth, man.
But when Thomas started playing Israel Houghton's version of Mighty to Save, I didn't know what to do with myself all of a sudden. I was just like,
practice.
Yeah. And so part of it is like a skill, like it's just musically different, and it's more practical. That's part of it, the reason why. But then the other part is, we need leaders that know the culture, the music, because
have the skill.
I could not do what Thomas and Gavin can do. And so we need them, and we need Hispanic leaders as well. I can sing in Spanish, and I've been told that my pronunciation is okay, but I can't play the music. Yeah, Gustavo, yeah, okay. but I can't play the music like Hispanics can play the music, and I can't. And so anyways, all that to say, it's going to take time to move people from thinking that it needs to be done to loving that it's being done. Does that make sense? Like the desire for it to be done is gonna take the Holy Spirit and some time. So
I love this question, Mike, and I just want to echo what I've heard. I have the unique privilege, for those listening that don't know Gavin. You know, Gavin is African American, and we love working together. And he challenges me. When I first got out there, I wasn't in full agreement with some of his style, but then I'd come home and talk to my wife, and she's just gently coached me and was like, you know what, you need to have another conversation with him and listen to him. And I've learned a lot from my wife and from Gavin. But what's fun now, and I'm comfortable with my inbox filling up when we push worship styles in a different direction. And just like David said and others, it is discipleship. And I love the privilege to meet with people that are uncomfortable, because it's just one more way that I can show them from the Word who we are in Christ. And that, you know, I believe with all my heart that God sees the end when he created us. And so he sees this beautiful mosaic of all these different tribes and tongues gathered one day that are going to worship him forever. And so leading with Gavin has been a lot of fun. And I've definitely seen brothers and sisters challenged, but we're also showing them from Mark 7, you know, not to elevate the traditions of man above the commandments of God, and show them what that looks like from Scripture. And then sometimes some of the older white brothers and sisters are a little surprised that I was driving with my car with a boombox with Leon Patillo singing my heart out, and they don't even know what that means. And I'm like, that's all right. Let me show you. So anyway, I can go on, but this is a great question, and it's been great growth for me personally.
I find too, like, I love the fact that our kids are being exposed to so many different styles. Like, we have a diverse family. We have Asian children. And so when they hear their language being spoken, right, when Mara hears Mandarin, like, I think that is just so amazing for them to get to experience that and see when they hear songs sung in a different language. I mean, you know, they were actually just talking today during our school time, like, I think I want to learn Spanish because I want to understand, you know, what's going on around me more. So I just love that because of what they're being exposed to, like it's really giving them just not just a Christian worldview, but also a broad worldview that like the world is a lot bigger than just us. And so there's just a lot of variety out there. And so it's really great for them to get to experience. And I think church is a pretty amazing place to experience all that and to hear the word spoken in all these different languages, I find is just super exhilarating and encouraging and just something that I want my kids to be exposed to and myself to be exposed to as well.
So DJ and Jess, we're still waiting on a Kazakh song.
Yeah, if y'all could work that out. He's still kind of
get back to you on that one.
Hey, me and Thomas learned a Amharic song in a day. I don't think anybody understood what we were saying, but we tried really hard. So
y'all killed it though. Y'all killed
Give it a shot.
Says the person that's not Ethiopian.
Right.
But
you know, Heather brings up such a good point.
Yes, Spanish is also very good. She never speaks in Spanish, and she knows Spanish.
Heather brought up such a good point that I think we often miss in these conversations because so many times we assume that all of our families are monoracial or monoethnic. The more we push to care for the orphan, the more we cultivate a foster and adoption culture in our church, the more important it becomes that we continue to grow in these things that we're talking about. I've talked to, Todd and Nancy, you know, kind of exemplify this in this conversation, but I've talked to one of the surprising kind of populations of people I've heard from, the more and more we've talked about these issues, is multiracial couples, but then also, you know, families who have adopted children. I want to pivot for a second, but just to kind of wrap up this portion, I can't remember who I heard say this. I think it was Pastor Albert Tate, who's a pastor in California, and he made a joke. I think it was him. Albert Tate, if you watch this, you don't know who I am. I don't know why you would watch this, but I'm a fan. But I think it was you. Just take credit for it, even if it wasn't. But he made a joke. He was talking about the multiracial church, and he talked about just being in community. And there was this older woman. I can't remember if she was Korean or Chinese, but he was just saying how he's a hugger, you know, and he's pastoring this older Asian woman. And so when he greets people, he hugs. But when she greets people, especially a pastor, like she would bow, you know, in respect. And so he said the first time that they, you know, would like interact, you know, he would, you know, come in for a hug and then like she would bow and it'd be like super awkward. And he said, so the next time he was like preparing himself and he was like, no, you know, I'm going to give up my preferences. And so he said the next time he went to bow very rapidly, but she went to hug and he like headbutted her in the face. I don't know if that was a true story or not, but it is such an amazing illustration that we're not going to do this perfectly. You know, it's going to require all of us to have uncomfortable moments, maybe even painful moments, to say some of the wrong things, to react in a way that we wish we could take back. But it's a part of Ephesians 4, how as the different parts of the body do their work, then we grow into the head who is Christ. We all mature individually and collectively as a body to become more like Jesus.